the grand and often tragic theater of naval history, some ships are defined by a single spectacular moment of glory or a devastating end. Others are defined by a long, arduous, and relentless grind, a testament to endurance and the sheer will of their crews. But once in a very long while, a ship comes along whose story is so improbable, so packed with action from its first day of war to its very last, that it almost defies belief. This is the story of a warship that was already fighting when its fleet was still waking up to a nightmare. A ship that chased down a secret weapon in the first hour of the war, fought through nearly every major battle in the Pacific, and ultimately met its end not by shell or torpedo but by staring into the heart of the atom itself. This is the story of the United States ship Helm, the destroyer that simply refused to die. Part 1. The Pre-War Tin Can. In the mid-1930s, the world's navies were caught in a complex web of treaties designed to prevent another catastrophic arms race like the one that preceded World War I. The London Naval Treaty placed strict limits on the size and number of warships nations could build. For destroyers, this meant a standard displacement of around 1,500 tons. American naval architects, working within these constraints, became masters of optimization. They needed to create ships that were fast, well-armed, and capable of operating across the vast distances of the Pacific Ocean. The result was a series of destroyer classes that would form the backbone of the U.S. Navy's fleet screen, the so-called tin cans. The Bagley class was one such result. Authorized in 1934, these ships were a direct evolution of the preceding Gridley and Mahan classes. They were sleek, powerful vessels designed for a singular, brutal purpose, to deliver a knockout blow with their torpedoes, and they were armed for bear. Each Bagley-class destroyer carried an astonishing 16 21-inch torpedo tubes, arranged in 4 quadruple mounts, 2 on each side of the ship. This was the heaviest torpedo armament ever fitted to a U.S. destroyer, a clear signal that their primary mission was to engage and destroy enemy capital ships. For self-defense and action against smaller targets, they carried 4 5-inch 38 caliber guns in single mounts, a versatile weapon that would prove its worth time and time again. Our story's hero, the USS Helm, designated DD-388, was laid down at the Norfolk Navy Yard in Portsmouth, Virginia, on September 25, 1935. Construction moved at a steady pace, and on May 27, 1937, she was launched, sliding into the waters of the Elizabeth River. She was named in honor of Rear Admiral James Meredith Helm, a distinguished naval officer who had served in the Spanish-American War. After fitting out and undergoing sea trials, the USS Helm was officially commissioned into the United States Navy on October 16, 1937. Her early career was typical for a new ship in peacetime. She conducted her shakedown cruise and initial training exercises in the warm waters of the Caribbean, honing the skills of her fresh crew and working out the mechanical kinks inherent in any new piece of complex machinery. She participated in fleet problems, large-scale war games designed to test naval strategy and coordination. For 2 years, she operated with the Atlantic Fleet, a silent guardian on a calm sea. But the calm was deceptive. Across the globe, the drums of war were beating louder. In Europe, Germany was on the march, and in Asia, Imperial Japan was continuing its aggressive expansion into China and eyeing the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia. The United States, though officially neutral, was growing increasingly concerned. In 1939, as war erupted in Europe, the strategic focus began to shift towards the Pacific. The Helm, along with much of America's naval might, received new orders. She transited the Panama Canal and joined the Pacific Fleet. Her new home port was San Diego, but soon the fleet would make another move, a fateful one, to a forward base in the Hawaiian Islands, Pearl Harbor. The move was intended as a deterrent, a powerful statement of American resolve in the Pacific. Instead, it placed the fleet directly in the crosshairs of history. Part 2. Baptism by Fire, December 7, 1941. The morning of Sunday, December 7, 1941, dawned bright and warm over the island of Oahu. For the sailors of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, it was a day for rest, relaxation, and divine services. The great battleships were moored peacefully along Ford Island, a majestic spectacle of naval power at ease. But the USS Helm was not at ease. She was not tied up at the docks with the other destroyers in East Lock. Instead, she was in West Lock, preparing to deperm. Deperming was a process to reduce the ship's magnetic signature, making it less vulnerable to magnetic mines. To do this, the ship had to be underway, and by a stroke of incredible fortune, the Helm was scheduled to get underway at 8 o'clock that morning. At 7:55, 5 minutes before her scheduled departure, the world changed. The first wave of Japanese aircraft, launched from carriers hundreds of miles to the north, screamed down upon the unsuspecting harbor. Ensign William A. Tanner, the officer of the deck, was on the bridge. He saw the planes, saw the explosions blossoming across Battleship Row, and understood immediately. There was no hesitation. He sounded the general quarters alarm, ordering the crew to their battle stations. The Helm was already moving, her engines coming to life, her lines being cast off. As chaos and fire erupted all around, the USS Helm became one of the first, if not the very first, American warship to get underway and fight back. Her gun crews scrambled to their posts. The machine guns, already set up on the deck, opened fire almost instantly, their tracers reaching into the sky towards the swooping Japanese planes. The 5-inch guns, still cold, were manned and loaded in record time. As the Helm gathered speed and headed for the main channel, she was a lone, defiant greyhound charging into a swarm of wolves. The harbor was a vision of hell. Smoke billowed from the stricken USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma. The air was thick with the roar of planes, the thunder of explosions, and the shriek of diving aircraft. Navigating the channel was a nightmare. The water was churned by explosions and potentially blocked by sinking ships. The Helm's commander, Lieutenant Commander J.L. Carroll, had to make split-second decisions to avoid disaster. As they steamed towards the harbor entrance, a Japanese DD-388 Val dive bomber singled them out. The plane peeled off and dove, releasing its bomb. The crew watched it fall, a black speck growing rapidly larger. The bomb missed the ship's port quarter by a mere 50 yards, 46 meters, exploding in the water and sending a geyser of spray over the deck. The concussion was violent, lifting the stern of the destroyer and knocking 2 men overboard. Without stopping, the Helm dropped a life buoy and a smoke float, reporting their position before continuing her race to the sea. Just as they were nearing the anti-submarine nets at the mouth of the harbor, the lookouts made another terrifying discovery. At 08:17, a conning tower was spotted in the water. It was a Japanese Type A midget submarine, one of 5 that had been launched to penetrate the harbor and attack the battleships. It appeared to be snagged on a reef. The Helm's forward guns swung around and opened fire. The 5-inch shells straddled the tiny submarine, but it managed to break free and submerge. The Helm couldn't stop to hunt it. Her priority was to clear the channel and establish a defensive patrol outside. Another destroyer, the USS Monaghan, would later ram and sink a different midget sub inside the harbor. The sub that the Helm had engaged, however, managed to fire its torpedoes, which struck a dock near the seaplane tender USS Curtis and the cruiser USS Raleigh. It then ran aground again. One of its 2 crewmen drowned, but the other, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, managed to swim ashore, where he was captured the next day. He would become America's first Japanese prisoner of war. The USS Helm, meanwhile, had made it. She cleared the channel and took up her patrol station, the first ship from inside the harbor to reach the open sea. She began a sweep for enemy submarines, her crew still running on adrenaline, their ears ringing from the constant explosions. A short time later, a friendly aircraft mistook her for an enemy vessel and dropped 2 bombs, both of which missed. It was a grimly ironic postscript to a morning of unbelievable chaos. The 2 men who had been blown overboard were miraculously rescued later that day. An initial damage assessment revealed that the near miss from the dive bomber had caused flooding and power failures, but the tough little ship was still very much in the fight. The war was less than an hour old for the United States, and the USS Helm had already fired on enemy planes, engaged a submarine, and survived multiple bomb attacks. Her legendary career had begun. Part 3. The Long War, Pacific Campaigns. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, the United States was on the defensive. The Pacific Fleet was shattered, and Japanese forces were advancing across Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. For the USS Helm, the early months of 1942 were spent on vital but grueling escort duty. She steamed with the task force built around the carrier USS Saratoga, protecting her from submarine threats as America began to gingerly strike back. She escorted convoys to distant outposts, a lifeline of supplies and reinforcements. In one mission, she helped rescue 29 people from the remote Phoenix Islands, and later picked up survivors from the torpedoed tanker USS Neosho, a grim taste of the brutal submarine warfare that now defined the Pacific. In August 1942, the tide began to turn. The United States launched its first major offensive, landing Marines on the islands of Guadalcanal and Leyte in the Solomon Islands. The Helm was there, right in the thick of it. She provided naval gunfire support for the landings on Leyte, her 5-inch guns pounding Japanese positions ashore. She screened the vulnerable transport ships, fending off Japanese air attacks. The campaign for Guadalcanal would become a bloody 6-month struggle of attrition on land, at sea, and in the air. Just 2 days after the initial landings, the Helm witnessed the aftermath of one of the worst naval defeats in American history. During the night of August 8th and 9th, a Japanese cruiser force surprised the Allied fleet guarding the transports, sinking 4 heavy cruisers, the American USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and USS Quincy, and the Australian HMAS Canberra, in the Battle of Savo Island. The Helm arrived on the scene at dawn to a horrific sight: a sea of oil, debris, and desperate men clinging to wreckage. For 2 straight days, she crisscrossed the debris field, pulling exhausted, wounded, and oil-soaked survivors from the water. It was a somber, heartbreaking task that underscored the brutal reality of the war in the South Pacific. Following Guadalcanal, the Helm was transferred to the Southwest Pacific area, under the overall command of General Douglas MacArthur. For the next year and a half, she operated primarily in the waters around Australia and New Guinea. This was a different kind of war. It was a grinding campaign of island hopping, of securing bases, and pushing the Japanese back step by step. The Helm escorted countless convoys, braving Japanese submarines and aircraft to deliver troops and supplies to the front lines. She participated in amphibious landings, her guns softening up enemy defenses on places like Woodlark Island and Ley. She patrolled the treacherous waters of the Coral Sea, a constant, vigilant presence. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was absolutely essential to the Allied war effort. By 1944, the industrial might of the United States was in full swing, and the Navy was ready to take the fight to the heart of the Japanese Empire. The Helm joined the newly formed and immensely powerful Fifth Fleet. She was assigned to Task Force 58, the main fast carrier strike force. Her role had shifted from a jack-of-all-trades in the South Pacific to a specialized guardian for the most valuable ships in the fleet, the Essex-class aircraft carriers. She screened them during the massive invasion of the Mariana Islands, including Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. This campaign provoked the Japanese Navy into a major counterattack, leading to the Battle of the Philippine Sea, better known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American naval aviators decimated their Japanese counterparts. Later that year, the Helm was part of the epic Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. She screened carrier groups as they launched strikes that sank the Japanese super battleship Musashi and crippled the enemy fleet. The battle was a sprawling, chaotic affair fought over several days and in multiple locations, and the Helm was in the middle of it, protecting her carriers from desperate air attacks, including the first organized use of a terrifying new weapon, the kamikaze. The final year of the war was the most brutal. The Helm supported the landings at Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines, dodging suicide boats and kamikaze planes. Then came the invasion of Iwo Jima. She was part of the screen for the escort carriers providing close air support for the Marines fighting their way up Mount Suribachi. The skies were constantly filled with danger. After Iwo Jima, the Helm moved on to the final great battle of the war, the invasion of Okinawa. From March to June 1945, she operated in the most dangerous waters on Earth. The Japanese threw everything they had at the American fleet, unleashing wave after wave of kamikaze attacks. Destroyers on radar picket duty, like the Helm, were the first line of defense, and they paid a heavy price. The Helm endured the onslaught, her gunners firing until their barrels were hot, splashing numerous attackers and protecting the fleet. It was a nerve-shredding, exhausting ordeal that pushed ships and crews to their absolute limits. In late July 1945, with the war rapidly approaching its conclusion, the Helm was assigned one last, poignant mission. The heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis, after delivering components for the atomic bomb to Tinian, was sunk by a Japanese submarine. Due to a series of tragic errors, no one knew she was missing for days. When the survivors were finally spotted by a patrol plane, a massive rescue operation was launched. The Helm was one of the ships diverted to the scene. She spent days searching a wide swath of the Pacific, looking for any signs of survivors. It was a grim echo of her mission at Savo Island 3 years earlier, another search for comrades lost to the depths. After this final somber duty, the Helm steamed for Ulithi Atoll. It was there, on August 15, 1945, that she received the news. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. Part 4. The Atomic Epilogue. The USS Helm had done it. She had survived. From the first treacherous moments at Pearl Harbor to the kamikaze-filled skies of Okinawa, she had fought, endured, and won. She had earned a remarkable 11 battle stars for her service, a testament to her presence in nearly every major campaign of the Pacific War. With the war concluded, she sailed for home, passing under the Golden Gate Bridge and into San Francisco Bay, a triumphant veteran returning from the sea. For many ships, this would be the end of the story, a quiet retirement and an honorable place in the history books. But for the Helm, there was one final, surreal chapter to be written. In 1946, the United States was eager to study the effects of its powerful new weapon, the atomic bomb, on naval vessels. A plan was conceived, codenamed Operation Crossroads. A fleet of surplus and captured warships, American, Japanese, and German, would be assembled in the lagoon of Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. They would be used as guinea pigs, subjected to 2 atomic bomb detonations to measure the destructive power of nuclear weapons against a naval fleet. The USS Helm, the tough survivor, was selected to be one of these target ships. She was towed across the Pacific one last time, not as a warrior, but as a test subject. On July 1, 1946, she was anchored in the target array for testable. A B-29 bomber dropped a 23-kiloton atomic bomb, the same yield as the one used on Nagasaki. The bomb missed its intended target, the battleship USS Nevada, and detonated in the air over the fleet. The fireball, the shockwave, and the wave of radiation washed over the anchored ships. Many were sunk or heavily damaged. But the Helm, positioned about 2,100 yards (1920 meters) from the blast, survived. She was battered and scorched, but her hull was intact. She had stared into a man-made sun and refused to sink. 3 weeks later, on July 25th, came Test Baker. This was a different kind of hell. This time, an identical atomic bomb was detonated 90 feet, 27 meters beneath the surface of the lagoon. The result was one of the most terrifying and iconic images of the atomic age. A colossal column of water, 2 million tons of it, was blasted a mile into the sky, creating a radioactive tidal wave that washed over the entire fleet. The battleship USS Arkansas was lifted vertically and slammed back down, sinking instantly. The aircraft carrier USS Saratoga, the same carrier the Helm had escorted in the dark days of 1942, was mortally wounded and slipped beneath the waves hours later. The USS Helm, positioned just 1,950 yards, 780 meters from this underwater apocalypse, was violently tossed by the shockwave and swamped by the radioactive tsunami. But again, she did not sink. She remained afloat, a testament to the strength of her construction. However, she was now one of the most dangerously radioactive objects on the planet. The spray from the underwater blast had coated her from bow to stern with deadly fission products. She was far too hot to be decontaminated or approached for any length of time. The survivor of Pearl Harbor, Guadalcanal, and Okinawa had met an enemy she couldn't fight. The tough old destroyer was officially decommissioned on June 28, 1946, while still at Bikini. After the tests, she was towed to Kwajalein Atoll. Too radioactive to preserve as a museum, too contaminated to scrap safely, she sat in limbo for over a year. Finally, in October 1947, her fate was sealed. The USS Helm was sold for scrap. Her final journey was not to a hero's welcome, but to a shipbreaker's yard, where her steel, still faintly radiating the memory of the atom, was carefully cut apart and recycled. Part 5. Legacy of the Helm. The story of the USS Helm is more than just a list of battles and dates. It is a microcosm of the entire Pacific War, embodied in a single 341-foot hull of steel. She was a ship born from treaty limitations, thrust into the war's opening salvo through a sheer accident of scheduling. Her crew's immediate and aggressive response at Pearl Harbor set the tone for her entire career. She was never a flagship, never one of the famous, headline-grabbing battleships or carriers. She was a workhorse, a tin-can destroyer that did the dirty, dangerous work that wins wars. She rescued hundreds of sailors from watery graves. She protected the vital carriers that projected American power across the ocean. She bombarded enemy shores to support troops fighting and dying on volcanic sand and in dense jungles. She faced down torpedoes, bombs, and the suicidal desperation of the kamikaze. She was a constant, reliable presence in a conflict defined by chaos and uncertainty. Her 11 battle stars are not just decorations. They are scars, each one representing a chapter in the epic struggle for the Pacific. Her final act in Operation Crossroads serves as a powerful and haunting bookend to her story. A vessel forged for a world of conventional warfare found herself facing the dawn of a new, terrifying age. That she survived 2 atomic blasts is perhaps the ultimate testament to her resilience. That she was ultimately defeated by the invisible poison of radiation is a stark reminder of how warfare had irrevocably changed. The USS Helm never received the fame of ships like the USS Enterprise or the USS Missouri. Her name is not widely known outside of dedicated naval history circles, but her story is one of readiness, courage, and incredible endurance. She was a symbol of the thousands of sailors who served on the small ships, the escorts, and the destroyers, who formed the backbone of the fleet and saw the war through from its horrific beginning to its triumphant and ultimately atomic end. She was the first to fight and one of the very last to fall. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible journey of the USS Helm. The stories of ships like these, the unsung workhorses of the war, are a critical part of our shared history. They remind us that victory is often forged not just in famous battles, but in the day-to-day grind of patrol, escort, and sheer stubborn survival. If there's a particular warbird, warship, iron horse, or battle legend you think is crying out for this kind of deep dive treatment, we want to hear from you. Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Consider it your mission briefing to us. We read every single one and are always on the hunt for our next target. And if you want to ensure you're on board for our next historical expedition, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. It's the best way to support the channel and make sure you never miss a story. We'll see you next time.